Yo, welcome back to Bitcoin Season 2 Writers Room. That's right, it's Bitcoin Season 2, but it's the screenwriters of this crazy drama comedy that we call Bitcoin and Bitcoin Season 2. I'm Charlie, and this is
Colin. Thank you for joining, y'all, and appreciate all of those who labored with us last week when I was bleary-eyed and limb-racked from 24 plus hours of travel. I am fresh as a daisy. I got 12 hours of sleep last night. We're back from the UAE, and props to the Bitcoin Magazine and BTC Inc. Team. They put on a fabulous conference in Abu Dhabi. For those of you who were there, you know it was a very fun time. Looks like they'll do it again next year. So if you missed it this year, check it out next time.
so
This is not about mining. I'm sorry, Donald. This is this is not a show about mining. We talk about other things related to Bitcoin here, but not mining.
Yeah,
So
rather, Donald, it is actually a show about whining, and we're gonna get into this because okay, so like Colin can go off and go do his Bitcoin mining thing in Abu Dhabi or whatever, but meanwhile on the internet where things actually matter, we're arguing about how we should talk about Bitcoin, as we have since time chain immemorial. We have been arguing on Bitcoin Talk, on the freaking Stack Exchange, in Twitter DMs, and now on podcasts. How should we subdivide Bitcoin? How do we get Bitcoin to the next billion users? Well, guess what? If we come up with new weird ass names, maybe that'll get them to buy more Bitcoin.
Yes.
And yes,
maybe we'll get people to understand things more. This episode could also be called "In Which Charlie and Colin Opine on Etymology and Semantics," which is like, funnily, the other 50% of Bitcoin, half of its code, the other half is how the fuck do we even talk about any of this stuff? And so for those of you who are new here, and even if you're not new here, probably are aware, maybe not be, about the sats versus bits debate, which I guess has been a thing for maybe half a decade at this point. Like, the sats is relatively new, but obviously Bitcoin is denominated as one BTC for one coin. That's what we see when we look at the rate on any sort of exchange or anything like that. But then there's not really any good nomenclature for denominating any units outside of that. Some people like sats. I think that's in a lot of ways, at least within the plugged in Bitcoin community, that is the most adopted term. It refers to 100 millionth of a Bitcoin. So 100 million sats equals one BTC. But, and this is where Charlie comes in, what is the other semi-popular method for denominating micro units of a Bitcoin?
Well, you will have to wait until after this word from our sponsor, and then we will explain. Bitcoin Season 2 is brought to you by Botanix. Botanix Labs is pioneering a new direction for DeFi with the first EVM L2 running on Bitcoin that's built to be forward secure, decentralized, and share gas fees generated by the network with users. See the future of DeFi at Botanix, botanixlabs.xyz.
Charlie's next podcast will be lo-fi beats you can pontificate to.
Yeah, which is just any time a Bitcoin maxi is listening to lo-fi beats. So so I think most people listening to this know what a Satoshi is. It's you divide a Bitcoin to its smallest possible unit that you can split a UTXO by, which is 1 in 100 million. And then there is a whole Bitcoin that everyone knows what those are called. And one of the things is like there's this barrier, which is a real barrier, which a lot of people who aren't in our weird Bitcoin world yet, they don't realize you can buy a fraction of a Bitcoin. And so the question is like, okay, do we give these subunits different names? And if we're going to divide a Bitcoin by 100 units, is that intuitive? Like right now, what is the exchange rate for Bitcoin to dollars? Well, thankfully, sats to dollars is a little more easy at $100K per Bitcoin. But are we really going to try to say, you owe me 48,562 Satoshis for that, baseball you bought from me? Like, that's weird. That's hard.
And it is. I think this is a good argument, though. My take on this is that they're not mutually exclusive. And we got Donal, sorry if we pronounced your name wrong, in here, with centibits, decibits, and millibits, which to his point, is an easy way to denominate Bitcoin. I think that you could have multiple different denominations for different units, just like we have with the US dollar system, right? No one's going around saying, you know, I owe you 25 cents, you know. Well, actually, they will say that. Or sorry, 25 pennies. They're saying, you know, I owe you a quarter, things like that. Well, maybe they would have if this were 1912 and a quarter still bought you anything. But you could see a world where like sats are a penny denomination, and then you have these other larger denominations that fit in it, right? That's still really kind of, I think, complicated though, because people don't think in these micro units.
And the thing is, like, even Bitcoiners struggle to like kind of wrap their heads around and intuitively know the value of 1 sat or 100,000 sats in real terms, in like dollar terms. But again, that's also Bitcoin's volatile. But yet sats have become the dominant standard for subdividing Bitcoin. There's no debate on this. Anywhere you go where Bitcoin is subdivided, everyone does it in sats. However, you can subdivide Bitcoin into different amounts. Or, as the genesis for why we're even talking about this today, you can come up with wild and wacky new names, which are so goddamn confusing that they like
wild and wacky here being euphemisms for what Charlie really wants to say.
Yeah.
And yeah, so let's just pull up. Do we want to pull up John Carvalho's tweet?
Yeah. Hold on a second. I thought I had it. Let me pull it up here. So again, want to try to be
coming from Synonym CEO John Carvalho. Formerly, he worked at Bitrefill for a number of years. Left to start his own project called Synonym, and which I don't really know how to describe. He describes it as like semantic web of things for Bitcoin, and it's kind of like, as far as I can tell, a way to use second layer technologies like Lightning to define certain conditions to create almost like a Nostr-like ecosystem. But that's kind of beside the point, because we're going to be talking about this BIP that he is putting forward, where he wants to reclassify every micro unit of Bitcoin as a Bitcoin. So
whoa. Can you say it again? You mean the things we call sats he wants to call Bitcoin?
Yes. That's exactly what.
I feel like I'm not hearing you correctly. That sounds insane, Colin.
Well, dear listener and dear Charlie, dear co-host, that is exactly what he's saying. And so under this nomenclature, 100 million Bitcoin would be 1 Bitcoin that we currently understand it as today. And I know it sounds probably ridiculous to a lot of people. I'm going to be charitable and steelman part of this. I do understand what he's saying, because when I say I'm going to send you Bitcoin, I don't mean I'm literally going to send you a whole Bitcoin, right? It's like when you send someone a micro unit of Bitcoin through the Lightning Network or through on-chain transactions, whatever, you are sending them usually a fraction of a whole coin, unless you're paying for something huge at this point, right? So logically, I understand where he's coming from in the sense that the smallest unit of a Bitcoin is still Bitcoin, right? Like the smallest UTXO still represents the share of a Bitcoin. So I understand where he's coming from with this. That being said, we are so far along the adoption curve right now that this would be incredibly fucking confusing.
It's
insanely confusing.
I'm with you. Like, I love to, as an intellectual exercise, imagine different interpretations of things. You know, it's funny that John Carvalho, the author of this BIP, is, you know, a guy who says, I've got my thing called Synonym, and I'm going to emphasize certain semantic interpretations of things. And here we are with one of the like more challenging semantic leaps, which would be we're going to change a Bitcoin to mean something else. And I get it. It's actually, I like new ideas.
Yeah.
But the thing is, like, why is this long ass piece he puts together this whole rationale? Why is it this popular? And wwhy is everybody saying they love it?
Yeah, here, scroll up, because the people who don't love it are not being public about it. Can you go down to the specification, the redefinition of the units? Because I think this really go to like the old display versus the new display. This is what I love, like, because just looking at that, we're at new display. 10,000 BTC.
We're rich, baby.
for 10,000 sats. I mean, that just triggers something in my mind where I'm like, wow, I'm fucking loaded now. I don't have to work for the rest of my life. And it doesn't compute, I think, for people who have been around for a while. And even for newcomers, I think that this is going to be confusing because they've been told there are only 21 million Bitcoin will ever exist. Well, now we've got 21 quadrillion or whatever Bitcoin under this new standard.
We've got Uniquely Sats in the chat who says, I can hear normies saying I told you they could change the amount of Bitcoin. So yeah.
Yeah,
And then we do have a Conjure Donal again saying that they actually agree with the bit because Satoshi is the actual denomination. A Bitcoin, as we know it now, is a made-up construct. But see, this is not wrong. Like, as you know, because I was saying, like, I do enjoy intellectual exercises to like see like what the semantics, you know, what
So
it helps you like ask what is a Bitcoin. However, we're also in the business of trying to be pragmatic about like is this even a good idea? Because
yeah.
yeah.
And just to like hit on the it's a made up construct thing, I appreciate that argument to a point, but this kind of goes back to, you know, when I'm arguing with some of my friends on the left and they say X is a social construct. Literally everything is a social construct. Even our understanding of science and mathematics is socially constructed around what we choose to define things as, right? So sure, it's a construct, but it's one that is either emergent or top down, and we'll get into this a little bit. I've got some we will need a bigger block clock.
This is big block clock. This is big block clock's fun, you know, campaign. That's who's behind this.
Yeah.
NVK, he wants to sell more block clocks.
And to this point, you're literally arguing semantics 100%. And I'm not saying that definitions aren't important, but that's my whole point in this, is all of this is ultimately down to what society adopts in terms of, or what users adopt in terms of definitions, right? And these definitions are either top down, like with Bitcoin itself, because Satoshi gave it the name Bitcoin, or it's emergent and bottom up, like with something like Sats, right? And at the end of the day, what is most palatable to the most users is what we will adopt as a definition, just like with literally any linguistic phenomenon. Every definition that you see is the result of either top down or bottom up adoption of that thing, usually bottom up in terms of organic consensus on something.
Yeah, I'm gonna fire off a tweet mid recording here, saying that big block clock is most certainly behind the Bitcoin semantics.
NVK and shambles.
NVK and shambles. So where do we go from here, Colin? Because we have a few different topics. We're only 15 minutes in, and if we haven't scared anybody off, there are some different angles we can go with this. I think one that you wanted to talk about is just the semantics of dividing subunits in general, and you want to talk about how that has emerged in the US dollar and English context. And then I have my own weird opinion, which I won't poison the well with until we get there. So
I think let's go ahead and jump into the the emergence of different denominations for the dollar and what that can teach us about why this is such a difficult conversation to have. So
for those of you, I have my tab shared. I can show you if you need.
Yeah, so these are ChatGPT spit out, you know, explanations for why we get different, why we have different names for different units of the dollar, right? Some of these are obvious, like the quarter, for example. I mean, it's a quarter of a dollar. Others are less obvious, like the penny actually has its roots in an Old English term penig, which was adopted from Germanic, which was used as the smallest unit of Anglo-Saxon currency back in the Old English era and in the Middle Ages. The dollar gets its name from thaler, which is a silver coin minted in the Holy Roman Empire in 1519, and then later the Spanish dollar, which was the most used currency in the American colonies before the English kicked everyone's ass. And that's not even true. But a few other ones that I think are interesting here just to highlight. There are some other there are other ones that are obvious, but why they got adopted are less obvious. Like I didn't put this one in here, but the nickel gets its name because it used to be called a half dime. And the reason we started calling it nickel is because in about the 1860s, they started issuing nickels with 25% nickel content, 75% copper. And we ended up adopting nickel because people started calling them nickels. This was not like in the Coinage Act of 1792 within the U.S., where we get a lot of the other denominations like the half dollar, the dollar, the dime, and other things like that. Nickel was emergent in terms of people's adoption of it. And to me, it reminds me a lot of Satoshi because of that, right? People just started throwing it around and saying, we should call it this, and then it stuck. And so that's, I think, something that you have to contend to when you're talking about, well, we should use this or we should use that. It doesn't really matter what you personally think, because if the majority of people involved in a conversation or discourse are using something else, then that is going to be the word that's adopted. And this is why linguistics is so slippery, because it's like the most obvious thing is not always the thing that gets adopted.
And that's the word we're going to keep going back to, is emergent. In that, I think that this might be a productive conversation if literally anybody used Bitcoin to refer to sats. But no one uses that term. That's like that meme where it's like, stop trying to make Bitcoin happen. It's not going to happen. I do have an opinion that I think other denominations might emerge, but again, I won't get there yet. But that's one of the reasons why I think, I, with my own opinions, still say, sats as the dominant denomination for Bitcoin still is just the one I'm going to use and support until a point that something else seems to emerge. As much as I think it's fun to put stuff out there, and I'm putting I'm saying something a little spicy here, I would like ask why the hell John Carvalho needs to make this a BIP and fan these flames. This seems to me a little bit, I'm gonna regret saying these words, it little seems to me like a plea for relevance, and like a very much like a look at me type behavior. John, you're welcome to come on here and argue with me about this, but this seems kind of ridiculous, and I'm amazed at the amount of like people that I see like jumping on this and saying this is like a great idea, let's do this. I'm like, good, okay, then just start using it. You're gonna be so goddamn confused yourself as you try to do this. You're probably gonna hurt yourself more trying to refer to sats as Bitcoin than you're going to help then you're going to like help people wrap their heads around it. And yeah, you were gonna say something?
Well, just the proposal aside, which I agree is kind of ham-fisted, the way that it's being proposed as a BIP, like you said, is very queer.
Why does it need to be a BIP? Is it
exactly because this is something that you could easily
semantics in Bitcoin core code? Because
yeah. Well, because you could do this as a UX and UI decision already. Like any wallet could do this in the same way that wallets show sats, because you're not actually changing anything that goes on in the back end when you sign a transaction, right?
Yeah, I'm
if
pretty
you
sure
wanted to adopt this standard, you could. But I think this goes into the problem. Sorry, and I'll let you respond. But
now I got to speed read through the BIP to make sure I'm not like saying something totally
I
wrong.
don't really understand how you would even apply this in terms of the code. Like I didn't read that far because this to me seems like nothing this is never going to happen, and I don't really know why John even proposed it, because to me, it seems so obvious that this won't be adopted. But at the end of the day, this again just goes back to, I think, the central problem here. It's like these types of denominators and this nomenclature cannot be imposed from the top or from Bitcoin Core. These kinds of linguistic problems or adoptions are bottom up, and trying to change definitions never really works. I mean, we see the limits of this with, a lot of kind of postmodern critiques of certain things too, right? You can't just change definitions for population groups without there being massive pushback if it's something that's ingrained in their vocabulary.
See, if I'm not mistaken, this doesn't change anything about Bitcoin's code base. It's just hey guys, all the wallets now have to change the front end GUI for how they display
Yeah,
this. Because
that's interesting.
again, I'm not a Bitcoin developer, but I don't think I was going through this with one of the Bitcoin developers in the past year, which is something where they're like, well, we're just like actually just saying you can divide these Bitcoin by this many decimal. It's not like the names of these things aren't in the Bitcoin code base. So maybe they are. Maybe I'm wrong. But like this, why does this need to be a BIP? Go put it in your wallet. Go put it in your front end application, because all of our hand wringing and all of my opinions don't actually matter, because the nomenclature will be defined by the people who create the largest top of funnel for the users. And all of our debating and all of our weird bips and all of our Twitter discourse really means nothing if one Chinese super app starts calling them bits. And that's really the only thing that matters. So far, it's really just been the 0.00x Bitcoin and sats are the two ways people have done it so far.
And a lot of this doesn't even necessarily matter all that much until and if Bitcoin becomes the dominant unit of account. Because at the end of the day, everyone's just looking at the dollar denominated or euro denominated or yen denominated, etc., for their transactions. I mean, very few Bitcoiners outside of those who've maybe virtue signal about it, or virtual signal. Very few Bitcoiners outside of those who virtue signal about it actually think in terms of sats. It's not, or bits or whatever. It's not intuitive because we don't use it in our everyday lives.
Yeah, I've heard a really good argument, and not argument, just a view, a helpful mental model, which is there may not be a static best way of displaying this, because if you view Bitcoin as going through a period of adoption, there may be best nomenclature for various stages that it is in. And in the future, maybe in 50 years, maybe we could see Carvalho's weird bits idea become, or Bitcoin idea become like the dominant nomenclature.
Yeah, if a Bitcoin is worth like $10 million or something, then maybe
exactly
it makes
when the dollar itself ceases to become a useful measure of value.
Right.
And what's interesting is I do want to kind of bring in this part of the discussion, which is one of my favorite underappreciated projects in Bitcoin right now is the Bitcoin Design Project. This is a collective of people who go around creating open source design standards, like saying, here's the official hex code for the color Bitcoin. Here is like best practices for displaying Bitcoin denominations. And they have kind of some primers and some treatment on like recommended interaction. Here's what we suggest as the preferred unit for apps. And what's funny is they actually have Bitcoin, 1/1000th of a Bitcoin as a millibit. A bit
they have a millisatoshi.
Yeah, which is a millisatoshi is not recognized in Bitcoin consensus, but you can, whenever you extend Bitcoin to layer 2s, you can further subdivide it. But they do some really interesting conversations on this. And from this project, you've had a lot of interesting wallet visualizations emerge, and they and so a lot of interesting things. Here I'm going to highlight a comment from Wake in the chat. What if 1 million wasn't even that important? The actual amount doesn't matter. Blah blah blah. $100 is 10 that. So his angle is that the thing that matters most is that Bitcoin's total supply, you might almost refer to it as volume even, total supply doesn't change. And we're totally in agreement with you, Wave. This does become really just a semantics argument. The other kind of weird X factor in this conversation I'll bring up from the Bitcoin wiki, which is this is kind of the master list on bitcoin.it/wiki/units, which kind of is the go-to master list for the different ways you can subdivide Bitcoin. And if you thought calling Sats Bitcoin, as Carvalho would suggests, was weird, wait till you hear about Luke Dash Jr.'s weird numbering scheme.
Oh yeah,
Colin, are you
doesn't
familiar
he
with
use
tonal Bitcoin?
Yeah, because he uses tonal, right? Instead of what's the instead of like what we use, I don't know the name of like
Decimal, I think.
yeah,
Yeah.
decimal based.
He's literally
Yeah.
has it's an entirely different numbering standard. Like if you've heard of hexadecimal, or if you've heard of like instead of being base 10, you can be base 16 or base 8, or binary is base 2. You know, the tonal is a different numbering scheme. And of course, Luke has to make sure that all of his weird tonal interpretations are in this master list of Bitcoin subunits.
It's just you talk about not intuitive, man. This
Yeah,
is not intuitive for anyone except for people who think like Luke, which is
which
a
is
very
just
small
which is
contingent of people.
I would say, yeah, it's useful for all of the maintainers of Bitcoin knots. I believe it's just 1%.
Which is a growing
It's like,
there's
well,
a growing population, you know, admittedly.
well,
I mean, it's still not huge.
Well, knots is written in tonal Bitcoin.
Yeah. So, and you know what? God bless him. I guess. God bless him. I guess, you know, diversity of clients is important to a point. Although I'm not really totally sold on that.
That's a whole other conversation.
Depends on the blockchain. I think that maybe Ethereum, there's an argument for that because what was it? It was like go ETH, like Geth would like crash every update.
Yeah,
You know?
we're over here. Meanwhile, like Ethereum and Solana chains keep like having weird clients.
Yeah, you know, it's like so for them, it's good to have some redundancy there. But just going back to the fact that John made the Bitcoin thing a BIP really quick. Sats is Bitcoin again. It's this. It's like the difference between the vernacular and the Vulgate. You know, it's like the Vulgate being the Latin language and the prescriptions of the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages and in the Renaissance versus the vernacular, which was the common tongue. And I feel like that's kind of what this is it's using, you know, the high priests of Bitcoin Core to issue an edict for how we should denominate Bitcoin versus letting people just decide what makes the most sense to them. And that's why I do kind of like to what you were saying earlier. I do like Sats right now just because a lot of people just decided on it. It got passed around and maybe it's not the most efficient or intuitive because I agree bits just seems to make sense.
Oh, I haven't outlaid this. I mean, yeah, cards on the table. I'm a bits guy. But the thing is, I'm not writing a bits BIP. One, because I can't write a BIP. But two, like,
well, you could write a BIP.
Yeah, I mean,
John's not a developer.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, like, I'm in favor of adopting the vernacular, as you say. Like, Sats is what people use. Even like, I just can't get over the fact that I think it's not the most intuitive thing ever, and I think it's still kind of ridiculous we don't use bits. But I'm not gonna lie, I don't really think it matters a whole lot to like try to push this outside of like an intellectual exercise.
Yeah, I think it probably doesn't matter that much either. Matters so little that we spent an entire writer's room on it. But it is an interesting intellectual exercise to your point. I don't think this is ever going to get solved is the thing.
We're going to argue until some Chinese super app chooses to display it in whatever denomination they want, and that's just how it's going to be. It'll probably
even then, I think because the ecosystems from east to west are so siloed, you might get two separate denominations.
Oh,
almost in the same way that we have the imperial and the metric system for measurements. Like there could be totally different denominations across the east and the west. That's just a prediction.
And then it's like us trying to create like the International Space Station and the ship doesn't dock because we use different measures. That's gonna happen though. I mean, that's 100. I actually like this theoretical future that you described, Colin. I'll pitch my bits thing. Okay.
Pitch bits.
Like, I'm trying to get my dad to buy Bitcoin forever. I finally got him to buy Bitcoin, but whatever. But he would just keep calling it bits. I'm not going to buy your bits, Charlie. Or if you were to go to a random person on the street and you're like, hey, do you know what Bitcoin is? And they're like, yeah, it's that bullshit crypto thing. I'm like, okay, well, just play along with me. Like, did you know you can divide Bitcoin into small pieces? And they'd be like, no. And you're like, well, you can. What would you call those small units of Bitcoin? Guarantee you, unless they've heard of Satoshis, they're going to call them bits. You go listen, watch any like science fiction TV show. What's the currency? It's either credits or bits every time. And then on top of that, like, there's how many Satoshis in a Bitcoin? 100 million. That's so unintuitive. You know how many bits there are in a Bitcoin? 1 million. Way more intuitive. Everybody gets that. So that's my case.
Counterpoints. No counterpoint to bits being the most intuitive. That I don't think you can argue against that, right? There's no world in which someone doesn't look at Bitcoin and then think, well, obviously the smaller units are called bits. The counter argument to the 1 million, though, is that we're going to get to a point where that's not sufficient enough to denominate people's balances. If Bitcoin continues to moon and number go up into the future indefinitely, then you're going to need something more than that. But again, I think that these things are not mutually exclusive. Going back to the nomenclature for the dollar and for all of its denominations, there's a world where you could have bits and sats. Just sats are units within a bit, right? And then a bit is a unit.
Have like half pennies. Remember, we had like half pennies in our whatever.
Never forget what they took from us. We used to have half pennies.
Fiat took that from us.
You used to be able to go down to the tavern and buy a tankard of ale for a half penny in like the 1790s or something like that.
Absolutely shameful. I wasn't angry until now. Now I'm galvanized.
Now we're just absolutely furious. But bits are okay. So this is important.
But this is the counter argument. This is that this long person with a crazy name, DHNG. They say bits are already used in computer science, and maybe bits with a capital B. I mean, that's been the argument. That I think Bitcoin, which is in the early on, especially, was more of a technical community. They're like, can't use bits. Everybody already talks about bits, like in computer science. And I'm pretty sure that's why we don't currently use bits. I'm pretty sure it's because the devs built these applications, and then Bitcoin, despite all of our egos, accrued more users. And by that time, we were already using sats, which is a less intuitive thing. I mean, that's the same reason like English words are spelled weird, not because it's the best way to spell them, but just because that's how they emerged. And I think that's...
And I think that this is not the bits thing. While I appreciate, like you said, why in the early days this was a problem, because all of the people who were paying attention to Bitcoin were computer coding autists who were tuned into this kind of stuff and were just software engineers or developers by background. Don't think that this is going to be a problem for the vast majority of users and adopters. Like, that's not something that they're going to immediately think about. And I also just don't think it's going to be confusing, because at least to me, and maybe this is my own silo or my own myopic view, but we're clearly talking about a currency. No one's talking about data storage or computation, right?
Yeah, so I agree. I think sats are fine. We haven't even gotten into like what the symbol for any of these things should be.
Oh man,
whole other.
Do you remember there was I don't remember if it was through Bitcoin Magazine or Tommy from Bitcoin Magazine. There was a competition back in the bear market where they were trying to get people to design Satoshi symbols, and there were some pretty clever symbols that came out of it, and a few that I liked more than others. I don't know if we're ever going to get there. Maybe we will, but if you think about that, even I don't even know how necessary that is, because do you ever really, and maybe this is just because you can't get anything for pennies or dimes or nickels or quarters anymore, but do you ever really see the cent symbol and used anywhere for the US dollar? Like the C with the little line in the middle of, like, you never see that.
I mean, right? Yeah, that is a good point. Well, these days, thanks to fiat, you just quote things in subunits of dollars with the dollar symbol. So
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Powell.
Thanks,
I
Fed.
feel like this is a, go ahead.
No, I'm nearing the end of, I think, our useful conversation, because
Yeah, I think so.
we could go down infinite rabbit holes, but should we go down infinite
No,
rabbit holes?
I don't think so. I think, but just one last point on this from me. We can just file this under, emergent phenomena and problems with decentralized consensus and a decentralized ecosystem. When you don't have leaders necessarily, or like definitive leadership to define things for you, you have squabbles and problems like this. This is a recurrent theme on Bitcoin Season 2 when we've talked about consensus for covenants and other things like that. So Satoshi equals Super S. I do have to say that if it's the Super S that I'm thinking of, is that the one that we all used to draw in middle school and high school? Or am I
yeah, the one with the 2 sets of 3 lines, you connect them at the top and bottom. Yeah, the Super S.
I like that. That's pretty fun.
That gets a good hell yeah from me. So, I think on that note, we're gonna wrap this up. I will say again, I don't mean everything I say. I did kind of I did rag on John a little bit, but John, I'd love to have you come up here and give your case sometime for why Bitcoin as the most subunit makes sense. We'll be nice. We'll be gentle. I think you are a great person to talk to. So,
yeah, we encourage debate here. And Charlie, there's something really important that I think we didn't touch on, and that's